Thanks, Rowena. Really interesting. And that trade-off between disruption and making the system work is obviously one we wrestle with all the time. I mean, Andy, to come to you, picking up on some of Rowena's points. Wes Streeting this morning sort of made the argument that particularly perhaps those on the left shouldn't argue that the state can't function or that there's something fundamentally wrong with the state. They should be sort of active agents in leading the state through that. I wanted to sort of get your reflections on that, but also thinking particularly, clearly you know and understand the civil service and the structure of government for your time as a minister, but particularly working with the government system that we have as Mayor of Manchester. What's your reflection on how things might need to change?
Well, from my point of view, the state does need to change. But perhaps it's more the elected state first, reform of Westminster, and perhaps I could come back to that, Alex. In terms of just where we're up to follow on from Rowena, it's a mixed picture, but I'm going to start with a real positive. I think MHCLG, Michael's old department, is increasingly impressive with the clarity of its drive towards devolution and indeed the pace that they've put behind English devolution. We're moving quickly now to an all devolved England, and what Michael did has been carried on by Angela Rayner and now carried on by Steve Reed. And to prove I'm a fan of, I was always more a fan of late Gove rather than early Gove, if I'm absolutely honest. But I do have Michael, our trailblazer devolution deal behind me, not just here for this event, by the way. It's always there, and I kind of had a real, if you like, reinforcement of my belief in what central government can do when it puts its weight behind us when Michael was in that position. We have a mayor's council that is becoming increasingly functional. So at the last two mayor's councils, Angela Rayner set in train what was then delivered in the budget, the overnight visitor levy, which is very important to all mayors of all parties. The last one, mayors asked for powers over taxi licensing, maybe a niche issue for people down there, but a big one in the real world when we have lots of out-of-area taxis undermining public safety. These issues have been heard and fixed. Ministers are very engaged, and actually that's true across the board. I did say mixed though, so do you mind if I just sort of point out from here what Whitehall looks like to me? I think we see some that are taking contradictory positions within one department with a contradictory position against another, or indeed, I would say, resisting actively the growth mission. And these are the kind of changes, like the specifics that Rowena was looking for. These are the type of specifics, I think, that need to be addressed. In terms of contradictory positions, we have the Home Office abolishing police and crime commissioners and integrating them with mayoral combined authorities like I've had for almost a decade. And I think that's the right reform, to increasingly integrate services in one place-based system, which is what we've got in Greater Manchester. But then I see the ICB reforms going in a more NHS-centric direction and away from combined authorities. On homelessness, a really good government homelessness strategy, I would say undermined by DWP and Treasury decisions to freeze local housing allowance. And I remember talking to Michael about those issues. That is contradictory if you are genuinely trying to reduce homelessness. If you then turn to growth, the growth mission specifically, the ongoing resistance of the Department for Education to devolve meaningfully post-16 education is a limitation on growth, and every mayor of every colour would say that to you today. We all feel it. So if the growth mission is real, cross-cutting, kind of piercing through all of Whitehall, why are we still arguing for things when we're out there getting the growth? I'm talking to you from the fastest growing city region in the country. Surely this is a moment to remove any barrier. And it would be similarly the case with the Department for Transport. It sometimes thinks infrastructure and infrastructure only rather than what infrastructure enables. And it comes up with cost-saving infrastructure that actually limits the growth potential because it builds it in the wrong way. And we've had those arguments around rail infrastructure in Greater Manchester, although a breakthrough on that very issue might be imminent. So that's the picture from here. And how do we fix it? I think all governments have found that there's sometimes a sort of deep-seated departmental position that they think they've got to hold. And I personally, as having been a minister, I saw that. I saw it in opposition, and I still see it as mayor. It's not justified, I don't think, for departments still to be resisting devolution. Devolution is the direction. Devolution is bringing growth, not just here, but in other city regions as well. So why are they allowed just to make us fight endlessly? It's attritional. We spend so much of our time making the case for devolution to the parts of the system that don't want it. And the answer, I'll finish on this point. See, for me, the word rewiring, Rowena rightly asked for a definition. Rewiring relates to the flow of power, doesn't it? It relates to modernizing systems so that the flow of power is better and in the right direction. And I would say, the unelected state Whitehall currently holds too much power. And indeed, in my experience of 16 years in Westminster, the whip system disempowers the elected state, because often MPs are required to rubber stamp the long-held departmental positions, and it's a brave minister that kind of unilaterally will go and try and change it. It can do, but it doesn't often happen. I personally believe the answer to this, to a more functional Britain, is a major reform of the elected state, Westminster, to mirror what's being done now in the local state out in the world that I'm in, which is about place-based, mission-oriented delivery, very much focused around growth. And for me, that means reform of the voting system to make it build a more collaborative, long-term culture within Westminster. I think it does mean reform of the whip system. I think it means replacement of the Lords with a Senate of the nations and regions, so that we are all pulling in the same direction as a country, as a place-based, mission-oriented system. We need to feel the national state at the back of the local state. In effect, what we find ourselves is fighting it all of the time in an attritional battle. So in the end, the rewiring is the empowerment of Westminster in a very different, in my view, political system. I was so struck standing under PR as Mayor of Greater Manchester than first past the post as an MP. What it meant for me in 2017, having stood for 4 elections under first past the post, is that finally I was on doorsteps trying to find points of agreement with Lib Dem voters and Tory voters, because I could have got their second preference. And finally, it just changes the conversation in a way that the public has always wanted it to change, to solutions and collaboration, and can't you all work together, and can't you take a longer term view about these things? And I personally think PR for the Commons should open up that culture change, combined with that reform of the Lords, combined with the raising of the esteem in which MPs are held by the removal of the whip system. Let them be advocates for their places. Parliament should base itself now more, the groups in Parliament should be more based on the boundaries of the combined authorities. How can we as a group of MPs in this area unlock everything that the combined authority in my area needs so that it can go out there and deliver maximum growth? I think we've got to get in the business of not just, the one thing I would say, the conversation down there seems to be just how do you form Whitehall on its own? I think you've got to have Whitehall in the middle of Westminster. The elected state is either side of it. Westminster at the top end and devolved authorities like mine at the other end. Westminster has to sort of, if you like, have the ability to direct Whitehall more in a mission-oriented, place-based way, and then Whitehall required more to support authorities like mine to make the pace of change much quicker, and to end this stalemate when we're often fighting for years about what I would say quite simple devolutionary asks.
Really interesting. Thank you, Andy. I'm gonna resist the temptation to point out that supplementary vote is a preferential rather than a proportional system. But your point about looking for second preferences is still is well made. But what I found particularly interesting about that is the joining of the very specific with the kind of the deep question about power.
Yeah. If I could just add one point there, I think it's about the same thread running through everything, isn't it? And that isn't there at the moment. What we're doing out where I am doesn't feel like it's matched in Whitehall. Some parts of it are really backing us, as I said, MHCLG, but others not. And then again, in Westminster, the thread doesn't run all the way from the Lords through the Commons in the same way. It feels to me that we all need to start facing the same way, pulling the same way, and then the change will come that the public want much quicker. And we need to sort of talk seriously now about reform of Westminster to bring reform of Whitehall. And
thank you, Andy. And so, Michael, picking up on particularly that theme actually that came out of what Andy was saying about power.